Welcome to List 5. Today's video, 5 terrifying horror games that will scare your pants off. Number 1. Amnesia. A machine for pigs, so it may not fair for me to add this to a list of non-scary games when the developers stated that the game would not be as scary as its predecessor, but I feel it still deserves a spot while still being a sequel to Amnesia: The Dark Descent. It's not a direct sequel. Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs follows a new story and layout as opposed to the first game, where instead of being stuck in an enclosed home with jump scares everywhere you go, there is more focus on the story and the progression of the main character. While I don't feel this game delivered in terms of horror, it exceeded in the storytelling element, which is very rare when it comes to survival horror. I won't spoil anything for you, but if you are into a game that is rich with story, give this one a go. Number 2. Among the Sleep. Among the Sleep takes a really interesting and unique concept, and destroys it with poor gameplay mechanics and a boring story. You play as a toddler who is on a mission in his own home to find out what happened to his mom. While the movement is a tad bit awkward since it is in the perspective of the child, the game still tries to scare you throughout the game, but they fall short and is almost laughable. While the game was made to be in the perspective of a child, I can't help but wonder if the game was meant to also be played by toddlers, if given the right direction. And if a sequel were to come out of this game, they would have to go by the rules that most other survival horror games go and not try to do something different for the sake of doing something different. Number 3. Five Nights at Freddy's. You don't even want to get me started on Five Nights at Freddy's, because me ranting about this game could take up an entire article. Instead, I will keep it down to just one segment. While I am impressed with how the developer took this name and expanded on it, I can't be impressed with how badly these games are in regards to how they try to scare you, and fail to do so. Much like other games, it's got a really good concept. Animatronic animals coming to life is a terrifying thing, but when it's done so in the way that the Five Nights at Freddy's games are, it takes away that scare tactic and turns it into something silly. Sitting in an office by yourself gets boring fast, when the only mechanics available are to shut doors and turn the lights on and off. I often wish the developer would have stuck to making this game better instead of cashing in on the brand and making mediocre games that have somehow gained popularity throughout the internet. Number 4. DayZ. We have talked about military simulators before, the good and the bad, and we have also talked about zombie survival games, good and bad. But what if both styles were thrown into one game simultaneously? Well, you would get DayZ. I don't feel my critiques are entirely fair due to this game still being in its development stage, and my opinions may change in the future. However, as it stands now, when you are trying to get people to play your early access game, and you promise a horrifying experience like no other, at least make the game stick to that promise. I oftentimes found myself wandering around in a desolate area until I got bored. I understand the point of finding ways to survive, but when there is literally nothing to do or nobody to see, it makes the game feel more like a walking simulator, and less of a military survival simulator. Number 5. Slender. The 8 Pages. This game just barely made the list above, which prompted me to throw it into this list. While Slender, The 8 Pages fails in some ways, it does exceed in others. Personally, I feel that back in the day, this game was the perfect training wheel for those that wanted to experience a survival horror game. While not necessarily being the best game ever, it not only gained popularity at an alarming rate, but it also became a phenomenon across multiple platforms, including creepypastas. Although the game lacks story or inner commentary, it does exceed in the way that most horror games should. It gives you the sense of unease and dread and constantly makes you feel like you are being followed, even if you turn around and see nothing there. Spoiler alert, you are being followed. Unfortunately, once you figure it out, it does become easy to beat and less scary. Subscribe.